I believe that in art and science are the glories of the human mind. I see no conflict between them. Contemplation of the great human achievements through the ages is helpful to me in moments of despair and doubt.
Oregon State University is a land-grant and sea-grant institution that has on its faculty many women in science. In an effort to explore the status of women in science at Oregon State University, the University Theater produced the American premiere of Stacy Swedeen's The Feeble-Mindedness of Women, about the life of scientist Gerty Cori. The title of the play was originally used in 19th century pamphlets describing how women were too feeble for higher education.
So the impetus for writing this play, I was living in New York, or a little bit north of New York, and when you're a playwright, you tend to hang out with other playwrights and talk, and it came to my attention that Ensemble Studio Theater, which is a pretty well-known and respected theater in the city, was holding commissions. Now, a lot of playwriting you don't get paid, so the idea that, oh, a commission, and the commission was by Ensemble Studio Theater and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and they were looking for plays that had to do with art and science, but really something to do with science. And I think that some of the reasoning behind that is because science itself is so creative, but few people perceive it as creative as it is. So I knew that there was this call for ideas. And at the same time, I had read this book by Sharon McGrain called Nobel Women in Science that was very moving. As I said, I've always loved to read, and one of the things of this book, there are interviews with all these women scientists, and there were these amazing stories that I had never heard. So I was very, very taken with that. And I thought, gee, and for whatever reasons, I thought Gerty Cori's life had lots of highs and lows, and that she herself was an interesting character in the way maybe not everyone else would have been on stage, because you look for certain characteristics. And I wrote the proposal and got the grant. And this was in the early 2000s. And then went away and read every book I could. Creative couples in science. Gerty and her husband Carl worked together. That was highly unusual. So I thought, well, this also is a love story. It's a love story of a woman in science, and it's a love story between a man and a woman. Then this play was done as part of, it was called First Flights.
In 1914, a vivacious and brilliant young girl dreams of attending medical school. Her obstacle? Women are not allowed to study the subjects of Latin, physics, mathematics, and chemistry. With the support of her family, she is tutored, and after passing the hardest examination I was ever called upon to take, 18-year-old Gerty Teresa Radnitz enters medical school in Prague. There she meets the two great loves of her life, biochemistry and Carl Cori.
You ask about husband-wife alliances in the sciences. They're extremely important, and they have provided one of the ways in which, before there were changes in law, that women were able to get advancement and to sort of make their way. There are a lot of famous husband-wife teams. Of course, the play is based on the alliance between Gerty and Carl Cori, and there are other very famous alliances, most notably the Marie-Pierre Curie alliance, and then their daughter Irene with her husband Frederic, and then others, and there are particular fields in which husband-wife alliances have been very strong.
The Coris earned their degrees in 1920 and soon were married, even though Carl's family felt that Gerty's Jewish background would hurt his career.
Experiencing the post-war devastation in Eastern Europe and witnessing the rise of Nazism, the Coris immigrated to the United States. It was difficult to find an institution that would hire them both as researchers. Often, Gerty's position was less prestigious than Carl's. At the New York Institute for Malignant Diseases, she worked as an assistant pathologist, while Carl worked as a biochemist.
Dr. Cori!
Yes?
Dr. Carl Cori!
Oh, yes, that is me, and may I introduce you to my wife?
Ah, Mrs. Cori, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Dr. Edmonds, part of the interview committee. And may I compliment you that lovely outfit? I'm sorry to rush, but...
No, please. After you.
Mrs. Cori, if you'd be so kind as to wait out here, you'll find some ladies' magazines on the table in the waiting area. This shouldn't take long. Dr. Mitchell is very excited to meet you.
Mamselle, so boxing be civil and make them cope and dread. That man should grow like an onion with his head in the ground. No matter, I have legs, I can show myself around.
Dr. Cori, may I introduce Dr. Mitchell? He'll be your direct report.
We've been hearing great things about the work you've been doing over in the lab in Buffalo.
Oh, please, thank you.
You've been there how long?
We've been there 5 years now.
We?
My wife and I.
Oh, well, yes. And your current research is?
What letter outlining did you not receive?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's the reason you're on the top contender for this position. That said, I always think it's important to hear it from the horse's mouth.
The horse? Horse will be speaking?
It's an American expression. How would you say it in German? That's your language, right?
My homeland is Austria, so I speak German, yes, but other languages as well. However, my English is still not so...
Excuse me, Dr. Mitchell. Sorry to interrupt, but that reminds me. Dr. Cori, what is the status of your citizenship?
My wife and I, we initially thought we'd be going through the Dutch government, but the job's in Buffalo. Like a gift. We've applied to American immigration, there's paperwork, an exam.
A man of your intelligence will slide right through.
Slide?
Edmonds means pass, another American expression. From baseball. You like baseball?
I see I have many expressions still to learn.
Edmonds, we'll have to take Dr. Cori to see Babe Ruth. Hell of a player. Now, we were talking about your research.
Yes, my notes were in the taxi, you see. Well, we've been focusing primarily on the fate of sugar in the animal body. There are many components to this line of research, many exacting measurements to be made in how the body absorbs glucose. We plan to work with insulin, and she was going to talk about that first.
She?
Gerty, my wife.
You're working with your wife?
Yes.
Dr. Cori, let me cut right to the chase. You do understand that expression, don't you? Cut the bull, brass tacks. My point is that we've been following your work with great interest. The folks over in Buffalo have nothing but respect for you. They believe, and we are inclined to agree, that there are great things in store for you in this country. We want our university to be part of that. You've seen the lab. I know for a fact that it's better equipped than where you are currently, am I right?
Yeah, it's very good.
And the salary we proposed is a jump?
A jump?
More than you make now.
Yes.
Dr. Cori, everything about this situation will be good, for all of us. I am fully prepared and authorized to offer you this advancement. You do see it as an advancement, don't you?
Yes.
Because it is. A big one. And I offer it to you under 3 conditions.
Conditions?
Minor, really.
First, we'd like to request you to take speech lessons. By your own admission, you've said that your English is...
my English is nicht so good.
Since it will be part of your duties to represent us at various conferences. Secondly, this research with insulin. While I'm sure it is very fascinating, my own studies have led me to believe that you're simply barking up the wrong tree.
Barking?
Now, I have some theories on the parasitic origin of cancer. With someone like you on that project, we can make real progress.
The third condition?
Stop collaborating with your wife.
Yes, that's got to stop.
Now, I know you have a European training, and I'm not exactly sure how things worked when you were in Prague. However, you're in America now. Working with your wife, can we be blunt?
She'll do nothing but stand in the way of your career.
Maybe you aren't aware. My wife, she's a doctor, a biochemist.
Interesting, yes, Interesting, yes, that's all here. Still. You're Austrian, right? What I'm offering you isn't anything to sneeze at times like these. Sentiment is running pretty cool towards the Germans right now, if you catch my drift.
And your wife?
Your wife is seen as a complicating factor.
In the equation.
How?
Carl. I can call you Carl, right?
I'd prefer
I'm not
doctor.
trying to put you on the spot here. Believe you me, but let's be honest. The minute you put a woman in the room,
everything changes.
And not for the better.
Do you know what we mean?
Not to mention the distraction. We can give you everything you've ever wanted. First-class research, important work. Come on, let's take a walk around the rest of the facility, shall we? You haven't had a chance to take in all we planned for you. Money will be spent. You can put yourself on the map.
Perhaps I should tell my wife how much longer...
Don't worry, Edmonds here will tell her. Let you and I head out this way. In fact, you go on ahead and take a look at some of the displays in the hallway. I'll join you in half a second. Just right down there. Dr. Cori, anything wrong?
No, I'll be just sinking.
This may be tougher than I thought.
The business about his wife?
No, his English. I'm not sure he was able to follow what I was saying. Go talk to the wife, will you? Tell her that she's standing in the way of her husband's career. They want to become American citizens, right? Tell her that it's against the Constitution for a man to work with his wife. That ought to clinch him. Ah, Dr. Cori.
I forgot to mention that Gerty.
Oh, don't worry. She's all taken care of. So, you met in school, huh?
Yeah.
My wife, well, she was my second wife, actually.
Ah, there you are, Mrs. Cori. I've been looking everywhere for you.
And now you have found me.
Yes, here you are.
I am here.
You are here, that is.
Yes, is it time for my interview?
Actually, since you brought the subject up,
Yes?
I must tell you something, with all due respect.
Go on, I can tell there is something on your mind.
I understand how difficult things must have been for you folks. The war, losing your homeland.
Yes, many people suffered and continue to suffer. But what is this respectful thing you wish to say?
This is very, Well, enough about the past. Your husband has a brilliant career ahead of him.
Yes, we work very closely together.
And you're going to stand in his way if you insist on working with him. Plain and simple, women don't belong in certain places, see? Certain positions, which we assume was obvious. And if you insist on continuing to work together, it will be impossible for him to succeed.
There's a saying in German about women. Schenken, schlucken und schweigen. To give, to swallow, and to shut up. Perhaps you have a saying like that here.
No, of course not. We don't say things like that here.
Oh, of course not. You only sing them respectfully, of course.
Look, in America, when a woman works with her husband, it makes him look weak. And that's just not right. If you had any thought for your husband, you'd stick to your own, whatever the hell it is you do, and let him do his work. You could ruin everything. What is it with women these days? Always putting their noses where they don't belong? Let men do men's work. Don't you understand me? What you're doing is... It's un-American.
Come, Gerty, another taxi arrives. The train is leaving back to Buffalo.
Dr. Cori, your wife and I
No,
discussed
no more
discussing-
birds. Enough birds from here. Birds are sliding and jumping in balls of brass. You have our paper? Here we want to leave nothing.
Please, Mrs. Cori, Dr. Cori.
I am Dr. Cori. She is Dr. Cori. Please refer to us by our proper titles and respect Dr. Edmund.
Look, folks, this is a simple misunderstanding. Just a
No
simple
misunderstanding. You and Dr. Mitchell have made everything like crystal. On the train ride back, I want you to explain to me again your findings and the difference between the fructose and glucose tolerance in the rats. What was the level of infusion?
4.5 grams per kilo per hour.
In spite of experiences like these, Gerty Cori reflected on the 1952 radio program, This I Believe.
I have been very fortunate in having been allowed to work freely in the field of science, biochemistry, in which I have been intensely interested ever since I got a first glimpse of it as a medical student in 1914.
Indeed, the Coris' work was so intricately dependent upon one another that it is often difficult to tell which scientists worked on which aspects of their research.
They published 50 papers while at Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. First author credit went to the one who had done most of the research for the paper. Gerty published 11 as sole author.
As a team, Gerty and Carl discovered the cycle of carbohydrates, how energy moves from muscle to the liver and back to muscle. Their discovery had profound implications for the treatment of diabetes.
Gerty was a biochemical sleuth, hunting and detecting enzymes, exploring and explaining the mystery of how cells convert food to energy.
The teaching body of the Caroline Institute has decided to award 1/2 of the 1947 Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine to Professor Carl Cori and Dr. Gerty Cori for the discovery of the course of the catalytic conversion of glycogen.
44 years after Marie Curie was the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize, and 12 years after Irene Curie became the second woman, Gerty Cori heard the following.
In work characterized by unremitting diligence, brilliant skill, and masterly acumen, today's prize winners have shown themselves to possess all the qualities of the great research worker in natural sciences. Professor Carl Cori and Dr. Gerty Cori, your synthesis of glycogen in the test tube is beyond doubt one of the most brilliant achievements in modern biochemistry. In the name of the Caroline Institute, I extend to you hearty congratulations on your outstanding contribution to biochemistry and physiology.
The Coris spent the rest of their career at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis.
The same year she was awarded the Nobel Prize, Gerty learned she had fatal anemia, possibly caused by her earlier research in X-rays. Working in her laboratory until her last month, Gerty dies in 1957.
I have a cousin that gives me great bragging rights. I'm always happy to talk about her. Her name is Betty Korber, and before I was working on this play, she told me a story. Well, first let me jump forward and say she's one of the top AIDS researchers. She and her husband lived in New Mexico. They were living in Los Alamos at the time. And if you Google her name, Korber was my mother's maiden name, so this was my Uncle George's daughter. She's just won about every award you can win in science and in AIDS research. And she's actively looking for the cure and feels that they're on the verge of a breakthrough there. Anyway, I love and adore her and am inspired by her. And she shared a story about when she was in high school and studying math, being actively discouraged from going forward. And I thought, well, how many other people, but somehow she found it within herself, but how many other women who are very smart, who would have something to offer, but perhaps are more vulnerable, are not as self-confident, or they don't find a mentor to help them? How many of them drop by the wayside who could have something to offer? And that was also something about Gerty Cori that was inspiring to me, because she actively helped other women in science. She was willing to speak up for them and to go to bat for them and to hire them into her lab. So I think it's also important that women support women. I feel that strongly.
Gerty Cori was a very interesting woman. I mean, she had such a difficult background in some ways. I mean, it had, so many things against her, and being Jewish in Germany and going through World War I in that way and so forth. And she was incredibly determined. And I think that's what you had to be. And she was lucky that she married someone who thought of her as an equal. I mean, that was really a partnership, which is still pretty rare.
Indeed, at the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, Carl said,
"Our efforts have been largely complementary, and one without the other would not have gone as far as in combination." Gerty was heroic.
There are letters in the Ava Helen and Linus Pauling's papers in the Oregon State University Special Collection and Archives documenting the relationship between the Paulings and the Coris.
One of the things I certainly picked up is that I can relate what Gerty's story was to some people I know here at OSU. They were a little bit later than Gerty in terms of the timeline, but Ken Hedberg is a physical chemist who has been here since the early 50s. His wife Lisa is as good a chemist as he is, but she came here with him and they worked as a team, much in the same way that Carl and Gerty did. And then later on, when David Shoemaker came here from MIT to be department chair, his wife Clara was an internationally known crystallographer, and so she came and continued her work under a similar type of structure. And I think both of those are examples of women who today would have been recruited in their own right, but came because that's where their husbands had their career go and continued doing what they were doing.
Have things really changed that much for women in science at this point? I'm not a woman scientist, so I can't answer that question. I am a woman in theater, and I can tell you that last year, of all the new plays that were done, 17% were by women. That's a low percentage.
You know, there is something about the culture that I think, you know, drives off women or dissuades them from entering.
In many ways, life in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is easier for women today, but in other ways, barriers do remain.
Contemporary research shows that while numbers of women have steadily, though slowly, increased since Gerty Cori's time, recruitment and retention of women and other underrepresented groups remain a challenge for STEM programs.
Among these challenges for women are primary responsibility for child rearing, stereotypes of women's work, and subtle bias against women. Scientists at Oregon State earned their degrees and began their careers during the decades of great change for women.
Being the first woman in mechanical engineering at UBC is quite a story. So my first class was a drafting class, and the professor came up and said, I think you're in the wrong place. This is not the nursing school. This is mechanical engineering. What are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm going to be an engineer. To which he said, well, women aren't engineers. So that was the start, and it was a struggle because they didn't know how to deal with women. At the time I started, there were no women's washrooms. So when they rebuilt the building, we finally got a women's washroom, and they put Kate on it because I finally got my own restroom after all this time. I started at OSU in 1983. I came in as an instructor. At that time, I was the first woman instructor in the College of Engineering. And again, it was the old boys network. I didn't hunt or fish, so I was actually excluded from a lot of the social events and things like that. They used to have a dinner at the end of the year in June, and it was up at the forestry cabin in PV Arboretum, and it was a stag party. Well, I was invited, but it was very clear, and I didn't go the first year, and in about the third year I did go, but it was very clear that it was not, women weren't supposed to be there. Now, it's so different because when we have College of Engineering events, it's not just faculty, it's all the staff. It's very inclusive. It's a much more welcoming environment. And I see this at so many different levels in our classrooms, and then we have education programs that really recruit and go out to seek women to become engineers. So it's a completely different environment than it was in the 80s.
So when I was working in the field as an undergraduate, I was maybe the only woman, and they were all men.
It was almost a stereotypical experience in terms of gender and science, women in the workplace stories, because he told me that he knew that my first loyalty would always be to my husband and my family, not to my profession and to the university. And as a consequence, I wouldn't be hired into a tenure-track position.
So my background is a little bit different, and I'm not sure if you all know the history here. Okay, so I've
speak to that.
Yes. So my early research career was enabled by white male privilege, and at the age of about 50, I transitioned to be a woman and continue my research career as a woman. So I'm kind of a case control study in gender in the sciences. You know, as a male going through that research career, I was given advantages that I know women colleagues were not always, and it bothered me, and it bothered a lot of people. But oftentimes people were not willing to step forward and say something or do something about it, which was even more troubling. As a woman, attending, for instance, a scientific meeting, I would be, as a male going to a meeting, I would be part of a small group conversation. As a woman, I attended a conference shortly after transitioning, would enter into a group of people to have a conversation about some topic, and the conversation would kind of flow around me. So it was very, very interesting to see that change. In faculty meetings, I would make a point again, make it again. It might come up by somebody else, and then somebody would follow up on that. So all of the things that I'd heard from my women colleagues and my female graduate students, I began experiencing myself.
Through sharing our stories, we continue to reclaim the history of women in science.
There's not a lot of women faculty in chemical engineering, or probably in any engineering, and there are a few, and people hold up those few. I have a friend who's always introduced, and here's our new woman faculty, right? They would never say, and here's our new black faculty. Right? They would never do that, but certainly, here's our woman faculty. We had a guy there who was really quite kind of dominating, leader of the whole lab, and he was very angry that I got a faculty position, and he used to, can I use a bad word? He would tell everyone who listened all the time that the university that I went to was on a cunt hunt, and that's how I got that job.
In 1957, a young woman applied for admission to the College of Forestry. This is part of the reply she received.
First of all, the number of jobs that are available for a woman in forestry are limited entirely to clerical type of jobs for which a background in forestry would not be necessary. Secondary, the requirements in specific courses in the School of Forestry curriculum are such that it would pose a definite problem as far as a girl is concerned.
It has gotten better for women in science generally since, say, 1950. I think there's still a ways to go, but I think it's definitely improved. And I think there are more women in the life sciences than in the physical sciences and mathematics.
Well, I think I learned as an undergraduate working in, with a bunch of men, that almost always it comes from a position of ignorance. Not negative ignorance, just it never dawned on them that maybe they had expectations for me that were different from men. And so if you bring them up and you just say, well, why can't I do this? Or I could do this, then they usually agree. They say, oh, okay, that would be fine.
We probably are close to parity in gender recruitment. There are pieces or areas of chemistry where I think there are some social pressures one way or the other, but simply from the numbers I see, I think the undergraduate population is, if not at parity, then very close to parity. I think chemistry is at the center of a lot of different sciences, and so there are, I think this is more anecdotal information, but the biological sciences, I think, tend to have a heavier concentration of women attracted than men, whereas the more physical sciences, physics, engineering, tend to draw more men than women. Chemistry is right at the intersection of those, and so we describe it as the central science, and so I think that there are interesting and attractive things about it that still draw people, regardless of what their biases are to begin with.
I actually didn't really notice anything gender specific when I was an undergrad. I mean, I took a women's studies course, and I definitely noticed things about, the culture and the world around us, and how we're definitely not finished evolving towards the ideal of equality. But we're still doing pretty well, at least in science, because at Northern Arizona University, exactly half of my instructors were female. So it was a 50-50 ratio. In fact, my organic chemistry teacher was a woman, and I was very surprised when I came here that one of the instructors said, oh, you know, if you go to be an organic chemistry teacher, you'll have a lot of, you know, opportunities and stuff, and they'll be wanting to have you do demos. And I was just like, why? Is that unusual to be a woman in organic chemistry? And she said, yeah, it's one of the chemistry divisions that has the least amount of women in it. So it's kind of surprising because I learned from a woman.
So we, you know, the science-based engineering, which is chemical, biological, and environmental, tend to have more women. Actually, not tend to, they definitely have a much higher percentage of women than the other engineering disciplines, especially like mechanical and electrical, have much lower percentages of women than bioenvironmental and chemical. Bio and environmental are among the highest percentages of women, and now I teach in the bioengineering program, undergraduate program. So I think we run up to 30% overall women in our school, although, you know, it does fluctuate.
What about graduate?
In graduate, I don't know the numbers, but certainly less. Mm-hmm. Certainly less women.
Our current graduate population is about 40% women, so there's a bit of a drop from parity as we go there. And to be honest, I don't know that there's any one set of reasons that explains that.
There is very, very little women in nuclear engineering, and we take a lot of our classes with mechanical engineering, and there's very few women in mechanical engineering. So I'm one of 2 girls in my year for nuclear, and there's 50 of us.
My first academic position was in '98. There was no women in my department, and I'm not really sure if there ever had been a woman in that department. I don't remember anyone ever saying there had been a woman in that department. So then I started looking, and I was really surprised to find out the first woman hired was the wife of the head, and she was there just a couple years, and I guess they both left. So she didn't get tenure or anything. The next woman brought in was a full professor woman as the head. Wow. And she just stayed a few years and left. And then the next one was brought in when bio came in 2005. And she's a untenured, or she was tenured when she came in. She has not received full professor. And the next one was me. So I was the 4th. And I was brought in tenured. So, and then we had someone brought in who had worked in a different department but came in an environmental part, and she was untenured, and she did get tenure in our department, and that was in 2009, and she was the first woman promoted in our department ever.
There's definitely been more men in the classes, especially in the big prerequisite classes like the 200 and some of the 300 level courses. It's definitely male dominated, which is sometimes kind of intimidating.
And my experience really is that I'm one of 2 to 3 women in the class. It's not a problem for me. I don't mind, being outgoing or anything like that. And even the fact that I'm a woman doesn't always make me stand out the most. The fact that I'm not your typical physics female actually makes me stand out even more. I wear dresses a lot, and I have a lip ring, and I was in theater, so I'm more outgoing, and that kind of a thing, and it doesn't really fit the typical, mold of a physics student.
Being drawn to study science crosses gender boundaries.
I know going into college I was kind of apprehensive about it because I was worried that my experience in college in general was going to be, a little bit like it was in high school. I was kind of picked on in high school for being a girl and wanting to go into science and stuff. But as I got into geosciences and into the university, they've been really, really supportive and really, I'm trying to find the right words, I'm sorry. They've been really supportive in trying to get me to my goal of graduating and getting a career.
So what do you remember most, or what about Marie Curie is inspiring or challenging?
She went through a lot of hardships in her life, and at the same time she went through a lot of hardships. A lot of her family died during her lifetime, and then
she also had a hard time being accepted in the scientific community, but she always continued to go at it and like strive to become better. Like she was in a position in one of the scientific, what are they called? Like a society. And normally you get paid for the position, and she decided to take it unpaid so that she could still be a part of it, and I find that really amazing. And then at the same time she was able to grow a family. And I found a lot of guys discounted her work back then because they felt that it was her husband who had done things, and a lot of it she had to almost be with her husband in the community for her to be accepted within it. So it's really impressive, and I feel like she had a lot of hardships and overcome them. And I feel like in my field as a woman I'd be more accepted than she would have ever been at her time, so it's really inspiring to me to try to become better.
So how do we continue to attract and retain women in scientific fields?
I think starting young for girls is important, and I think actually because girls, and I can remember myself, when I was 8 or 9 years old, that doing science didn't seem daunting, and then suddenly puberty hits and it's kind of, you don't want to do things that aren't feminine. And this idea that it's somehow too hard or something, whatever. So I think the time, really to get girls is somewhere between 9 and 12, 13, that's really the critical period when they start thinking, oh, I can't do things because I'm a girl. Because I think when you're little, you don't make those distinctions.
I'm involved in outreach to high school students. So we put on I'm a co-director of the SESI camp, where we bring kids in from high school, women and minorities, and do a 1-week research-based camp. We have pretty good data that most of these kids do go on to 4-year programs.
One of my professors, she's actually the department head for nuclear, which is really interesting, but I'm doing an honors thesis, so I'm doing it under her, and sometimes I'll go by her office and I'll chat with her if her door is open, so it's really nice.
I would say, at least for the organic chemistry students, they have a Wednesday night meeting where all of the graduate students, first year and from across the board, pretty much anyone who's still, any PhD student at Oregon State University, they go over various synthesis papers, and I think one time I counted them up just to see because I was curious. It was about 5 out of 25, 5 women out of 25 total people present at the meeting. So it's smaller than I expected, but in graduate work, I think being self-driven is very important, although there is still, of course, a lot of pressure, and the threat of failure is very real and very present, and that actually makes me so stressed out that I have difficulty taking my classes, and I have to remind myself that if I fail this term, then I still have a chance to retake it next term, that I'm not going to get kicked out right away, and that's essentially what gets me through, is knowing that I've got some sort of a safety net.
My best friend is studying pre-med here, and she is the best person to study with. She is so motivated to do just about anything, whether it's the gym or studying biochemistry. She's really excited about everything, so when I'm not really in the mood to study, she's like, no, we need to hit the books, and you need to do great on your tests and get into grad school. So, but it's nice to have friends that motivate. I really enjoy studying with friends.
The love for and dedication to my work seems to me to be the basis for happiness. As a research worker, the unforgotten moments of my life are those rare ones which come after years of plodding work, when the veil over nature's secret seems suddenly to lift, and when what was dark and chaotic appears in a clear and beautiful light and pattern.